have you ever asked yourself the question, what kind of moments actually matter? You know what I mean? Like when you're thinking about like life, making a difference, because we all want to make a difference, right? Like God's placed that in us. We are created with this desire to actually make a difference. And for some of us, of course, we don't think we can make a difference. We've been told in different ways that, we don't have anything to offer. We don't measure up. What we do doesn't actually matter. We've heard those messages. Some of us don't think we can make a difference, but all of us inside of us, we actually want our lives to matter. So in light of that, like, have you ever asked yourself the question, what kind of moments actually matter, right? So I've been thinking about that a lot, right? Because I'm at the stage of life, I'm getting a little bit older. My boys are like, they're graduating from like high school. So my oldest son's in college, my next son's in grade 12, he's gonna graduate. So I'm like having this time when I'm like reflecting on everything, you know what I mean? It's like a crisis going on in my life, right? And I'm asking myself the questions like, you know what? Like what really mattered? What brought my life to this place where it is? And I'm kind of surprised when I think back and I go, oh, there was actually like these little moments that I didn't think mattered very much, but actually they had an impact way more than I could ever dream or imagine when they took place, right? Like, so for instance, I'm in college, just graduated from high school. I'm in college, right? And I see this lady at college. It's Jen. She's now my wife, dude. But for 2 years, I remember I just kind of like tracked her in college. I'm like a creepy, weird troll or something, right? But I'm tracking her in college. I never speak to her once for 2 years. But I remember just thinking, man, she's so cool. She plays basketball. She dresses pretty hip. I dig her vibe. But like, I never talk to her. She never talks to me. I don't even know if she can talk, right? But never, like nothing. Nothing's happening. Nothing's going on. And then after I finished like 2 years of college in Saskatchewan, I moved to Manitoba to go to like this random university. And I remember it's like the first week when I'm at university, I'm at Superstore because I got to buy some food. I realized that if I want to live, I'm going to eat, and I'm the one that has to cook for myself to eat for like first time in my life. So I'm trying to find some food. I'm at Superstore, and I turn the corner of an aisle, and who do I see at the end of the aisle? But Jen, the girl that I like saw for like 2 years and never spoke to once in like this other province. And all of a sudden, here I am at university, at Superstore, and there she is. And I'm like, I should talk to her. But I'm like, what if she doesn't talk? Or what if she doesn't want to talk to me? I'm kind of freaking out in the moment, but I work up the courage and I'm like, hey, Jen, I'm Sid. I actually went to college with you for like the last 2 years. And she talks to me. In that moment, she talks to me. And that moment leads to like a number of other conversations. And that moment leads to like dating for a year. And that moment leads to like breaking up for 4 years. And then that moment leads to getting back together again and having kids and living life. And that moment of just talking to her in an aisle in Superstore had an infinitely greater impact than I would have ever dreamed or imagined like 20 some years ago. Do you know what I mean? Do you ever wonder what kind of moments like matter? Hey, why don't you think about like your own life? What are the moments that people have played in your life that maybe they weren't even aware what kind of a difference they were making, but it actually changed things, right? For better or for worse. I mean, I think about my own life when I was 13 years old. I'm at this little camp in the middle of like southern Saskatchewan, right? And there's this old dude who's speaking, and I have no idea who he was to this day. I don't even remember anything he said except this one line. It's at night, doing kind of this campfire thing, and he just says this one line. God doesn't want 90% of your life. God wants all of your life. And I remember in that small moment that I don't even think he could remember that moment. God used that moment to change me radically. Like that was the moment when I made a decision to say, okay, God, I'm going to love you with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength as best I can. You're going to be my greatest treasure, more important than anything else in my life. And for me at that point, it was baseball, right? Like baseball was, man, that was everything for me. But at that moment, baseball no longer was everything. At that moment, I made a decision that I wanted Jesus to be everything. And I love baseball, but baseball would be a thing or something I would use for my relationship with Jesus and to share him with others, right? Like Jesus would be everything for me. And that changed my life. It changed my vocation. It changed what I looked for in someone I wanted to marry. It changed, how I made decisions and all other. That moment impacted me in a powerful way. Okay, hey, listen, here's what I want you to talk about. Share a story about a time when someone said or did something that had a profound impact in your life. Go ahead, spend some time talking about that. Okay, when we talk about living on purpose or, making a difference with our lives, I think oftentimes in our world, we think about a couple of things. Number one, we think about, big moments that are significant, when we do something that other people can see. And here's what's really interesting. When we think about significant moments, I think primarily what our culture tells us is they're moments, the most significant moments are moments when we make much of ourselves. When we do something that other people look at us and say, oh man, that person is something, look how great they are. And I think oftentimes we're thinking in terms of what can make me feel good? We're thinking in terms of our own personal achievements. What can we accomplish? How can I post this on my Instagram story, so that people can see it and they can comment on it and they can press likes on it. And so we have all these ideas of the kinds of things that actually make a difference. And I think one of the interesting things is because we live in a culture that really celebrates, celebrities and people who have mass followings, I think sometimes for some of us, we think that we're only making a difference in the big moments of life. And it's almost as if, our lives are on pause until we can actually find that big moment. And I think sometimes for those of us who would be followers of Jesus, we almost feel the same thing, right? For some of us, we're into following Jesus. So it's not, we know that the big moments aren't so much making the most of ourselves, but it's accomplishing big things for the sake of God's kingdom or His way. And again, we live in this culture that celebrates the people that do the really big things, that have a great movement around social justice or something significant of that kind, which is good. That's good stuff. We want to make a difference in that way. But for many of us, we don't find ourselves in a position where we have, thousands of followers, or where we have this space where we're on a platform with thousands of people watching, or this chance, where we have the resources to actually make this big difference. And so for some of us, we wonder if we don't have the big moments, right? Can our life actually matter? And the Bible says yes. In fact, here's what's really cool. When Jesus comes to us and He talks about our lives actually matter, making a difference, when He comes to us and says that your life actually matters, it's not so much about our lives that matter. It's actually about taking our lives and engaging in God's purpose and plan that really matters, right? The question I think that so many of us often ask is, hey, what's God's plan for my life? What's His plan for my life? And we want to know that God has this big plan. If we could just figure it out, then somehow our lives will really matter. They'll make a difference. There'll be real purpose there. But the truth is that when it comes to living on purpose, our lives making a difference, the number one question is not primarily what is God's plan for my life. The number one question we actually need to ask is, hey, how can I use my life for God's plan? God's got something going on here. He's the creator of the world. He is at work. He has a plan at play. There's this story that He is working out for all of humanity, and He actually invites us into that story, and most often in the most mundane moments. But when we lean into the mundane moments, He uses our lives for His plan in ways that we never dreamed or imagined could take place. So, when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment, right? What's the most important commandment? Listen to what He says when He's asked that question. In Matthew chapter 22, here's what He says. He says, teacher, this is when He's asked, teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So He's saying, hey, listen, there's a whole bunch of things out there that you should or shouldn't do. We get that. There's a whole bunch of ways that God would have us to live, plans for people, but all these things kind of narrow down to just two things. He says, my plan for your life is to love Me with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's ultimately it. And I think for us, right, as like people living our lives at our schools, on our teams, where we are, we're asking the question, like, how can my life actually matter? The question we have to answer is, hey, listen, today, how can I love God with my heart, soul, mind, and strength? How can I love my neighbor as myself? Like, how can I use my life for God's plan? And when we lean in that way, on the daily, in the mundane moments, we have no idea what kind of a difference that can make. Okay, so what does that look like? So the first thing Jesus says is he says, hey, I want you to love me with your heart, soul, and mind. He says, this is my number one command, that you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, so I think there's two ways that we can love something or someone, right? Like number one, we can give to them something. We can love them by providing for them. So, when I had, when Jen and I had Peyton, right? When Peyton was first born, he was like an infant. Dude could do nothing, like literally nothing on his own. The number one way that we showed that we loved our child was that we would provide for him. So we would give him food. We would help him go to the bathroom. We would give him clothing and new diapers. And that we would rock him to sleep at night when he wouldn't want to sleep. I'd sit there rocking all day. Like we gave to him what he needed. That was how we loved him. That's one way to show love. There's another way of loving, though, that's not about, what we give, but how we treasure, right? So another way that we, revealed that we loved our son was how we spoke about them, right? Like I remember when we first had him, and I remember the doctor wrapped him up, and I took him into the hallway, and I wanted to show him to people around us, right? Like my mom was out there, and I was like, Mom, this is your grandson. And I remember giving her to my mom, and she looked at the grandson, and I was so excited. I wanted to tell her all about him. And I remember Todd, one of our youth pastors, was there, and I said, hey, Todd, this is my son, Peyton. And I gave him to Todd, and I'm like, oh, shoot, Todd's a youth pastor. I took him right back because he was going to start playing like a wide game or something with him. So I grabbed him back, but I was like, this is my child, and I wanted to show him off, and I wanted to talk about him. And, people would ask me things, and inevitably I would just end up talking about my son. I loved my son, and people could see that because it was obvious that I treasured my son. Okay, when it comes to loving God with our heart, our mind, and our strength, and by the way, he says love him with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. He says with all of who we are, we're to love God. Okay, so it's real, it's everything. He's not talking so much about what can we give to God. Okay, let me be really clear. When it's talking about loving God with our heart, soul, and mind, it's not about what we give him. There's actually nothing that God needs from us, okay? He is completely sufficient. He is God, okay? He doesn't need us. He can work out his plan however he wants apart from us. That's not what loving God is about. When it comes to loving God, what it's about is treasuring him, is trusting him, is seeing the value of who he is, seeing God as greater than anything else. And when we begin to see him, we think about him and how amazing he is. We act with our strength, so we do what he's calling us to do because we believe his way is good. When we have passion for him because, we understand how much he loves us. When he died on the cross, he expressed this infinite love for us that absolutely blows our mind. When we begin to see Jesus as the treasure he is, and we begin to understand that he is infinitely better than anything else we have, you guys, that's when we're loving Jesus, right? That's when we're loving God with our heart, mind, and our soul. This is when we're loving him with everything. And here's what's so important about that. When people see us love this way, they start to ask questions about who it is we love, right? They're kind of like, hey, why do you love Jesus so much? What about him is so amazing? I need to know about that. That's what starts happening, and that's when we begin to have an impact on others. When we love God that way, so he becomes most important in our life. Or let me try this out for you. When we love God that way, and we start to lose other things in our lives that are so important, things like health, security, friends, and they're real, and it's hurtful, and we lose those things, but we know we still have Jesus, and he is most important to us. So even though the tears are real, we're still good because we've got God. When we love him that way, people start looking at us and they go, hey, tell me about that. And when we start talking that, when we start living that, our lives matter because we're pointing people to the one who ultimately matters, God himself, right? Our lives make a difference when we love God with our heart, our mind, our souls, our strength. When we love him with all of who we are, we matter. So that's the first way we love. We love God with our heart, mind, and strength. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. So what does that look like? Okay, that's a crazy command. When we think about loving our neighbor as ourselves, there is a sense, of course, where we treasure others. We're passionate about others. But when it comes to others, we do have a responsibility to actually meet the needs of others. It's really interesting. When Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, he's not telling us that we should learn to love ourselves. He's assuming that we do. He's assuming that in the same way, we naturally move towards what we think is best for ourselves. If it's cold outside, put a jacket on. If we're hungry, we go for food. He's saying that in the same way that we move to love ourselves, we should actually look to provide for our neighbors, for the people that come into our areas that have needs we can meet with the same passion, with the same consistency, with the same perseverance that we pursue things that we would love to have. We should go now and pursue that for others. That's a radical kind of love. And when we start loving that way, when our lives become way more about what we can give than what we can get, you guys, our lives matter. When we roll into like our teams, our communities, our friends, that way, when we start to live on purpose that way, every environment we enter into, we see it as an opportunity that God has given us to express how much we love God and express how much we love others. When we see every moment like that, then even the mundane moments matter. You guys, that's what it means to live on purpose. When we begin to realize that life lived on purpose is about loving God and loving others, man, our lives matter. Okay, here's what I want you to talk about. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. What's one way that you love yourself? And what would it look like to love your neighbor in that same way? Hey, listen, so I've said this already, but I just want to end by saying this. If you're going to live your life on purpose, and that's what we're talking about here, how can I live my life on purpose? We all know that we want our lives to count. That's in us. I get it. It's in us. I want you to know that your life can count. God actually has a plan for your life. But the number one question that you need to answer is not what is God's plan for my life. That's a great question. We should ask it. I get it, right? Does God have something specific for my life? The answer is yes. That's a good question to wrestle with, but that's not the number one question. If that's the question, the number one question we're wrestling with, you guys, I just think sometimes it can feel overwhelming. I think we can have fear and anxiety that we might not be able to actually catch what God is calling us to, that we might actually miss out. You know what I think happens? We kind of start treating God as if he's like a game show host, right? Like he's got 3 curtains that have his plan behind it. But if we choose the wrong curtain, then instead of getting the new car, all we get is like the can of soup. You know what I mean? Like it's like he's a game show host, but that's not God. God is a father. He is a loving father. And he absolutely wants what's best for us. And he is leading us in the way that we should go. He is. He's leading you. He's got you. He's got you. The number one question that we ask if we want to live on purpose and we want our lives to matter is not what is God's plan for my life. The number one question we need to ask is how can I live my life for God's plan? Right? We know his plan. His plan is to love him with our heart, soul, mind, strength, and his plan is to love our neighbor as ourselves. So how, on the daily, the mundane moments, the real moments, can we lean into those realities? What are the things that we need to do that can help us treasure Jesus more, right? Because when we treasure Jesus and people see us treasuring Jesus, they start asking questions like, why do you love this Jesus so much, right? Why does he make such a difference in your life? Tell me about him. And that's the greatest gift we could ever give someone. Introduce them to Jesus, right? When we start living that way, that makes a difference. And not only that, but when we love our neighbor as ourselves, when in every situation we enter, we start asking the question, hey, how can I love these people in the same way that I would like to be loved? What could that look like for me on my team, in my school, with my family? When we start to live on purpose in every one of those moments, you guys, our lives matter in ways that we don't even see coming. It's the small moment that we don't even know if it makes a difference or not that can absolutely change our lives, can absolutely change the lives of the people around us. You guys, when we live that way, we are living on purpose and our lives matter.